hang on, am I talking about a privilege of being a person of colour and then using that as a way to not respond to climate change?
You're like, hang on a second, is this the bad place? Am I in the bad place? Hello and welcome back to No Books on a Dead Planet. This is a podcast where I unpack my problems with being able to fight the climate crisis adequately, because I can't really, when somebody tells me the world is ending or the things might be going really wrong, I can't process that. But because books are my most beloved thing in the whole world, if somebody told me that books were ending and there would be no more books on the planet, now I'm panicking. Now I refuse to let this happen. The wrath of God has entered my heart and I'm ready to fight. So that's basically what this podcast is based on. But it's also where I invite incredible people on to talk to me about climate books. One of my most feared objects in the world, reading books about the climate. No, thank you. But I'm facing that fear and I'm going to do it with a little giggle. And today I'm joined by Shaaba. Welcome, Shaaba.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Leena, you really took that frog and ate it, huh?
I really gobbled
did.
it up. It's gone. It's passing through my tubes. I was just on my fallopian tubes, so I was like, that's not how digestion works.
You know a lot about climate change, less so about the body.
This is why I'm a YouTuber and not an academic. One of the many reasons. Shaaba, please introduce yourself to anybody who is ignorant enough to not already be fangirling over your wonderful work and life.
This is too much.
It's too much, too fast. Ease off.
Hello, I am Shaaba. I talk about being bi and brown and having a big booty online, which is, I really want the three words, bi, brown and something to do with plus size.
I watched the video doing Live, Laugh, Lesbian, and then you were trying to come up with other ones, and it was like...
I had bi brown bodega recently, and that just seems really out of place.
That is merch waiting to happen, and I think that is the kind of merch the planet needs.
See, brown by booty seems to be in the running. Brown by bootylicious, it feels too Beyonce, so we're working it.
I'm hoping you're not putting this on your tax return, where it's like, so what's your occupation? Well...
But yes, I talk about everything... except climate change, because I too fear it greatly, and so I'm so grateful. Am I?
Slightly regretting your choices, but it's too late. I've locked you in.
I'll let you know by the end of the podcast.
Well, I don't know about you, but I really respond well to a deadline.
Absolutely.
And if somebody else is expecting me, stop it. If somebody else is expecting me to do something, I'm way more likely to do it. Whereas if I just want to do it for myself, it's never going to happen.
Exactly that. I don't know if your listeners know this, but we've had this conversation for I feel like it's been over a year about this. And I was like, yes, I'm going to read Banana Book. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, we were going to read the book, which is over there. How bad are bananas? The carbon footprint of everything.
And I it's been on my to-do list, but at the very bottom of my to-do list, because I don't like talking about this. And you presented the perfect opportunity for me to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So when this happened, I was like, yes, but also, oh no.
It's the ultimate chore body doubling. You're like, we must do this, but neither of us want to, under duress. Mutual consensual duress.
I'm grateful for the duress. Thank you, Leena.
No problem. Yeah, I do think that climate conversations in general are uncomfortable. I think that it overlaps with those other uncomfortable conversations you have with people in your life that you put off. And this is one that I think, because it affects everybody and it's actually kind of universal, is also something that's so hard to talk about. So I appreciate that you did want to step out and read a book with me today.
But don't you think as well, I don't know if I'm skipping ahead here, but that this book was the perfect almost excuse. That's why I was drawn to this, because I thought, I feel like I'm spoiling it.
Foreshadowing.
But a little teaser for you.
Keep them going. We need that listen time up.
But it's true, it's not just about climate change, is it? It's about everything. Or it can be with the mindset that Mikaela uses. So yeah, I'm excited to dig into that. It definitely gave me more of a reason to want to look into it and sort of, I mean, if yours is the anger of books, there can be so many different angers that all ultimately means the floor is lava climate change.
Yeah.
You know? So.
And I think it's as well, it's like, just pick your favourite hobby. That's not going to be a thing.
Yeah.
Okay, now you're worried?
You like chocolate?
Cool. Well. Sorry, Cadbury's World, it's over. Trains, it's not going to be a thing anymore. Yeah, no, I can keep going. But, okay, first, before we chat a little bit about the book, I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience talking about the climate. And I wanted for you to rate on a scale of 1 to 10,
okay,
how comfortable you are talking about the climate. Because even though I've actually started talking about it quite a lot online, I'd say my comfort levels around talking about it with people in real life I'd probably score at the moment around a 4 or a 5.
Oh.
And even though maybe I might be competent about it, I'm panicking it inwardly.
Oh.
You know, I'm like, it feels like somebody is asking me a really uncomfortable question about my health or something. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're kind of sweaty. And in the same way that there's different kinds of attention that I'm okay with, like, I'm quite naturally gobby. I'm not really, like, stage fright is not something I really experience through exposure therapy, probably, let's be real. So I don't really mind getting up and standing and talking in front of loads of people.
Climate change makes your lips sweaty.
Yeah, and if people want to, another thing is, like, if people want to sing happy birthday at me, I can't do it. If people want to just talk about me at me, I'm like, oh no, now I'm uncomfortable.
Well, hang on a second, Leena. To do your scale, I need to. So where does that lie?
Okay, so
the happy birthday
0
singing.
is like, I will leave the room if you say the C word.
Okay.
And a 10 is like, I have convinced everybody in my life to go vegan, and I've actually talked to the Prime Minister, and they're now reversing.
On my forehead.
Yeah. I've actually solved climate change myself because I'm so persuasive that I went in the back door of COP, and now everyone's convinced.
Next on my to-do list, cancer, we've got this.
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
Gift of the gab.
I'm going to go maybe like a 2 or a 3.
Okay.
Is that really bad?
I think I only find like, a little bit behind me.
I think, if I'm being really honest, it'll probably be a 2.
Yeah, that's fair.
But you're right, it's different. Looking at things, reading into it and doing my own self-exploration in the comfort of my own mind. Comfort? Well, sure.
The familiarity.
Yes.
The own living room of my brain.
The reassurance of my brain. 4. Whereas that definitely halves, I'd say 4, but publicly 2.
And do you think you're somebody in general who is like more likely to think about something in your head for a while before you verbalise it anyway? Do you think that's like a good pattern?
No, isn't that weird? I will be very gobby. I feel like that's a very similar... We've not spoken about that, but yeah, like you. I feel like climate change in particular is something that scares me a lot.
Yeah, and it's something that I think people process alone for a while before they verbalise it. Whereas I'm naturally, I think, somebody who processes things by talking about them. So in some ways I think I've slowed myself down because I'm like, I'll just think about this on my own for a while. And then when I'm really competent, I'll talk about it. And actually, that's not how my brain works at all. I have to talk while I'm thinking.
I feel you. But you know, I think this one differs from the other social issues that I'll happily talk about online, because I know that this is something that I'm still very reluctant to do something about. I see that it's a frog and I just don't want to be in a position where I want to eat it yet, because I know that if I do
there'll be legs in your throat, everyone will start,
like, I'll need to go in fully. And I realise that I should, but it's probably guilt and remorse that's making me not do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think it's also the separation of like, was my house farting then? My house just farted.
That was amazing.
Was it the wind?
Yeah, I think it was going through the door.
Oh my god, imagine if the apocalypse happened now. That would be like awful.
Now's the time to eat the frog.
No one will ever hear this podcast anyway. I think that's another interesting point about the climate crisis, is because I think the way we've had conversations about it previously is there's something that we're doing. So then it feels something guilty that you have to...
Absolutely.
You're like, oh god, I need to talk about this thing that I've done.
What I'm telling you, Leena, is that I'm a bad person and I'm not ready to be good yet.
I know, but you're like, I don't want to change. I want to keep burning. But I also think that maybe I've started switching it in my head and being like, actually, the climate crisis is something is happening to us and being done to us, and to different extents depending on where you're living and what your privileges are, but it is something that's happening to us, not something that we are actively doing in some ways. Some would argue. And even if that's not true, I think that's a really great way for people to start talking about it, and then we can unpack why we're wrong later.
Have you seen The Good Place, the TV show?
I've watched the first 4 seasons.
Okay, I don't want to give any spoilers away for anyone who doesn't, but like, it's a really good show, right?
It's
like one
so
of my favourite
good.
shows.
Yeah.
There is a character that you come across, and he tries to live his life amazingly, to the point where, like, he doesn't step on snails, and he's growing his own tomatoes, he's going to supermarkets, all of this stuff. And whenever I think of climate change, that scene and this person pops up in my mind, because even he wasn't doing enough.
Yes.
And I feel like it's a double-edged sword, that justification of saying, I'm not the one that's in the bad. I don't deserve to feel that guilty, because that almost makes me feel hopeless into not doing anything. But then at the same time, I feel like I need that guilt to make me do something.
Yeah.
So I don't understand my relationship with this guilt. I don't know if I welcome it. yeah, it's odd.
I think, again, but it's also in some ways hopeful because it's something that we're also working through in other places. So to do with like racism and class and capitalism, everybody, I think, is working through some extent of guilt, or that choice as to whether to take on the guilt or just the responsibility.
Yeah,
because I think for a lot of the time, it's like, okay, maybe people that I am vaguely genetically related to did something really bad, and actually I am related to them in some way, and also it doesn't even matter if I'm related to them because I benefit from what they did, so I can take on the responsibility for that without having to take on a feeling like I did it. Because if you feel like you did it, then you have to go into your psyche and work out what's bad about you. And you're like, I don't know.
I hear you.
I don't know if I'm making any sense.
No, you absolutely are. And actually, when I was reading this book, one thing that I actually had a conversation to Jamie, my partner, about this. And I was like, I wonder how Leena's going to feel reading this book. Because there are elements of this book that for those who don't know, I am brown, and Leena is not.
In the medium of sound, we must clarify.
And sorry, that felt really mean. Like,
no,
I am excluding you from my club.
Look at those blue veins. You can see them straight through my arm.
You're a gorgeous colour.
Leena sits before me, a ghost. I can barely see her.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
No, reading it, I felt a sense of guilt on the aspects talking about the UK and how us as the quote-unquote global West, right? Global West? Global North.
Global dicks. That's what we are.
Sure.
Just call a spade a spade.
Benefits from the system. But so much of this book is so interconnected with race. And I was thinking, how would I feel being a white person reading this? That sense of, as you said, appreciating that your ancestors maybe have done something. Yeah. I definitely felt that reading this, I lent into my brownness as a way to feel less guilty. Wrongly so.
Okay.
Wrongly so, because I still have the privilege. But I was like, this is going to be an interesting thing to talk about.
I think that's really interesting as well, because I think about it from a class perspective, in that I have been thinking a lot about unpacking like what it is to be working class and middle class, and because I come from a lineage of working class people, which is not very unique because that would be literally most of the UK. The middle class is a very new thing. I think some people lean into that of like, oh, it was the rich people, it wasn't the poor people. And how do you separate that?
Just such a middle class fight.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's like it's good to unplug yourself and be like, I could lean into both and neither's wrong.
Yeah.
But it's balancing that for yourself, because that's a really interesting headfuck that I don't have, that you have.
It really is. And I was just like, hang on, am I talking about a privilege of being a person of colour and then using that as a way to not respond to climate change?
You're like, hang on a second, is this the bad place? Am I in the bad place?
It's me, I'm the problem, it's me. This is what's happening right now.
But then it's also like what I like about, so I don't actually think we said what book we're talking about first.
Sorry.
Because we were going to read the banana book.
That's right.
Now it still exists on both of our shelves, gathering dust. One day we'll read the banana book.
When we're ready for a second frog.
But today we're reading It's Not That Radical by Mikaela Loach, which has just come out in 2023, the year of our Lord. Or is it? I haven't seen the Lord for a while. If he's here, he hasn't been pulling his weight.
Lord, hit me up.
What's the subtitle? Sorry, you've got your...
Climate Action to Transform Our World.
So Mikaela is an online activist, and she's done a lot of stuff in the real world as well. As if online activism isn't a real thing. Here's me talking about like an internet person trying to invalidate my own job.
Mikaela took the blue pill.
But she's been doing an incredible amount of work, like going to COP, doing lots of different work on like Rosebank, all of that as well. And she's written a book unpacking some of her experiences, but mainly also just like her top line thoughts for anybody who... I feel like this book is also for people who haven't really interacted with the climate crisis that much before, because there was a lot of overview stuff.
I loved it. This was like, this feels like a good introduction. And I don't know about you, when I look at books to read, particularly ones I'm a bit dubious about, my first thing will be to look at a book preview, and I want to look at that first page. And I did that before I bought, I'm just going to call it the Bananas book now. When I bought the Bananas book, it was stats, it was heavy, it was carbon footprint, it was calculations, and I thought, oh, I'm going to buy this because I want to do my part, but when I saw this one, the introduction was Mikaela talking about her going to see her grandma in Jamaica. And it was a beach, and I was like, I can relate to this. This is humanised, and I maintain that's one of the reasons I love this book.
Yeah, I mean, the first line is, this is a book for anyone who has ever felt doom. So, feels pretty inclusive to me on that level. What I really appreciated about what Mikaela's approach was at the beginning, she clarifies a lot of the terms that she uses. And something that I have only really been learning about in the last year or so is this idea of instead of saying somebody is, for example, black, you say somebody's been racialised as black. To acknowledge the fact that race has only been really a construct for the last 300 or 400 years. And I think that plays into a lot of what she writes, and that really helped. Like, if you're saying, like, oh, I wonder how Leena was feeling reading this book, and I'm like, I felt fine. It's okay. But it was...
I'm learning too.
Yeah, and it's that thing of, like, acknowledging through language that what we're talking about is mad. Like, it's something that has been invented and can be uninvented, and for that reason I think it's helpful when we talk about race, because it's less about, like, you, the inherently genetically bad person who has colonized the world, and more being like, hey, this is a construct that you benefit from, so you need to listen up.
Yeah,
but it's not that you are inherently bad as a white person to your core.
Yeah.
Because that would be the bad place.
That would also be false, right? In a world where everyone's trying to do what they can do, but can still do better, right? I think it's a really hard line for climate change media to tackle. It's that line which I actually don't respond to very well if people fall on the wrong side of it, of being quite patronising and being so doom and gloom, to be like, you know what? You need to do better, which is the reality. Right, that's why we don't want to hear it. It's because it hurts to hear. Yeah. It's, you need to do better, and I'm going to preach about this to you for 250 pages. That's not what somebody wants to hear. But we also don't need to sugarcoat it and act as if it's not so much a problem that we're contributing towards the X and myth that,
that no behaviour change happens.
What climate change? We're fine.
Yeah, and I think it's weird because I think there's so many social changes that are overlapping right now. I actually think it's a cool time to be alive.
Sure.
Like, maybe. I personally wouldn't have wanted to be born a woman any earlier. No, this is like my maximum.
And I agree. Yeah.
I think like the rape laws in the UK only changed the year after I was born. So I would this is my moment. I'm very happy to be born now.
We can vote. We have toilets. They're wonderful things.
And period products.
Yeah.
Because I think that we're also unpacking parenting. And one thing I've been thinking about when I was reading this book was this like, when a child does something wrong, ideally as a parent, you don't go, well, you need to do better, don't you?
You dick.
I always knew you'd fail because I already know these things about you, which has predisposed you to be rubbish. Sure. But then as a parent, you kind of want to be more like, I'm speaking like I am a parent. I don't secretly have a child.
Well, you did just cat sit.
I did just cat sit, so I'm an auntie, really. I'm a godmother to a cat. You go, hey, you did that weird thing. What's going on with you? What can we do to support you doing better?
Exactly.
Why are you doing that? Do you not understand? Just or do you need support?
This is the consequences of that thing. You know?
Yeah. And I feel like that's what I'm trying to do with myself, is more be like, okay.
Treat me like a baby, please.
Things don't seem to be going well at school, do they? Do I need to talk to your principal, or do you just need to study?
So this bedwetting.
Let's talk about it. Who is this boy you're dating? Why has he got a motorbike? That's bad for the planet.
Babe, if you're bedwetting at motorbike stage, I definitely think that maybe needs to be part of the other conversation.
Here's something that you need to know about me. One of my trauma memories is wetting myself in year 4. That's old. That's like, I was like 8 at school.
No, that's
And it wasn't even September, it was like July. It was like the end of year 4. It was like I was almost sad. It was so bad.
But please tell me that at the age of 8 you're not sitting on boyfriends' bikes.
Oh no. Coventry has you know, just because I grew up in Coventry. No, I was the opposite. No boys would let me on the bikes. Oh. Kept trying to hop on. What is this metaphor?
If I had a bike,
Leena, thanks. I'd let you hop. Would you let me urinate on it though? Is the question. This has gone awry already.
It really has.
When I was talking to you about what book you would like to read together, you picked this book.
I did.
Tell me a little bit why.
For that humanising element that we spoke about initially, I was just like, this is really interesting. But what also gripped me is, I mean, there's that personal element too. Mikaela is, for all intents and purposes, although I'm sure she probably wouldn't love to be referred to in this way, is a creator, right? And she actually talks about this in the book.
Yes.
About that difficulty of platforming people versus
platforming movements.
Platforming movements. But I appreciated hearing from somebody who had that sense of responsibility and that sort of more, I want to say, humanised candour. I feel like a lot of creators have this person next door energy, which I really respond to well, versus the scientists who are like, right, this is school.
I'm at work.
Yeah.
This is my job.
Yeah. So that too, and most importantly, I guess it was the way that everything strung together. The idea of climate justice is something that I had never thought about before. And I guess just as how Mikaela talks about climate justice being... I'm watching Bob's Burgers at the moment.
Great.
And there's this thing, an episode where Tina goes bird watching and they talk about the spark bird, like the bird that got them interested in bird watching.
Ooh, okay.
Michaela's spark bird was the racial element. It was a racial injustice that she was seeing, which is something that I can relate to so much. And I had no idea, like, I would not have linked the two together. But having read this book now, how on earth did I not see that these were linked, you know? So that, I feel like that could have been my spark bird.
Yeah, the kind of like link between like, hang on, this is all connected.
Yeah.
And actually in that way, I think it's really hopeful as well, because I think people,
Absolutely.
because climate links with everything, everybody has a spark bird potential somewhere.
So yours
they're going to be like
on a dead planet, right?
What, they're going to get rid of the libraries. What's going to happen?
Yeah.
And I think, it's really hard, but I'm glad I don't know, I found it really, really useful in a lot of ways, because I feel like I've heard some stuff about the concepts, but the examples that she gave, I was like, wow, I didn't know that. For example, one of the things was about Pakistan.
Yeah.
And how they're in a lot of debt, and actually the reason they are like doing a lot of things that aren't really great for the planet is because they're having to do short-term fixes because they owe the West so much money, and they owe the West so much money for like really bad reasons.
Because
like,
the West
unreasonable.
made them.
Yes.
Right? And now they're like, okay, well now we can't afford to pay our people so that they can live with very basic living standards. Hello, West, we need more money. And then they go, cool, raise the taxes, which means they need more money still. It is this vicious cycle.
Yeah, and then they start doing more polluting stuff because they don't have a choice. And that's something that I, as somebody without a politics degree or a geography degree or any really useful degree, that's something that, again, it's that kind of unknown where you're like, how would I have even, I couldn't have Googled that. Like, how would I have known what to Google?
Yeah, I hear you.
Or that even existed.
Yeah.
So I thought it was really interesting. How did you, when you were thinking about your impressions of the book and what you thought it was going to be like reading it, did it, now having read it, do you feel like it was different from what you expected, or was it similar? And
that's a really interesting question. So I want to be totally honest. When I first found this book, I wanted to read it. And when we were talking about it, and I was like, I wonder if Leena's seen this book. You'd heard of it too, right?
Yeah, I'd followed her on Instagram for a few years. That's how I know.
Found through Michaela's Insta, and you were like, sure, let's do this one. I was like, great, fab, amazing, feeling really good about reading this book. I then read the foreword section. I read I don't know what she calls it in this book, I've totally forgotten. Yeah, it was the introduction. It was the introduction before the first chapter, and I didn't like it. I regretted this book, and I regretted speaking with you about this. I was like, why did I agree to do this? Because that guilt set in. Everything that I'd felt about that, hang on a second, you're telling me it's not that radical. It's literally your title. It's not that radical. And now I'm sitting here thinking, sure, you're giving me a book that's an easy element into an easy path into understanding climate change.
This is the soft stuff.
I wanted stories about your time in Jamaica, Mikaela. That's not this.
That's the sun in the sand.
Yeah. That was very jarring to see at the very beginning, but I also totally appreciate why it was necessary. I will say, for people who feel like they might not commit if they hear too much quote unquote preachy, as people say, the things that often put people off having these conversations about climate change, I would recommend to not read that introduction straight away. I'd actually go chapter 1, then I'd take a look back, and then I'd move forward again, specifically for that reason, because it really did nearly put me off. I question if I would have continued to read it if we didn't.
A deadline.
Yeah,
Love a deadline.
Love an accountability buddy.
I think as well, like that, because there are people who exist in the climate space all the time. I think, again, this title is like it has lots of layers to it because for Mikaela, everything she said in the introduction is not radical. But then because she's existing in those climate spaces all the time,
exactly,
that's the soft sell, and the soft sell feels quite hard if you don't watch that kind of media. And again, that's not really in some ways our domain because a lot of people, I'd say me sometimes, I don't know where I fall on that, but we're consuming a lot of media that ignores the climate.
Yes.
Exactly. So when you're like, oh my god, I didn't know about this, or I didn't hear about this, or I'm not used to hearing about it referred to in this terms, it's because we never are, unless you willfully go out and look for it. But I think that's valid, and I think that books aren't, or even if the author's like, you should read this from beginning to end, I'm like, no. Or in the same way that, you know, artists who are like, you have to listen to my whole album the right way round, I'm like, no, it will work differently for different people, and that's okay, and to like customize how you consume something.
Just a different approach perhaps, but something that in hindsight I think would have helped me. I then went on and I felt myself being really critical initially. I wanted to fight back at quite a lot of points that I didn't understand, and it was I was making notes for my own benefit to be like, hang on a second, this is something I want to look into a little bit more. Hang on a second, this is something I want to chat to people about because something's not quite sitting right.
Yeah.
But then by the end of the book, I looked at my first notes and thought, wow, how interesting is it that I have grown throughout one book to almost correct myself on so much of the notes that I'd initially had. So, I mean, Mikaela says, I really hope that it transforms you in some way, even though I was really resilient to the idea of being transformed. I think it definitely has. And not in a way that makes me mad or, you know, like, oh, how dare you change me? How dare? But in a way that's really exciting to know in a really weird way that I could do it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's not too scary a subject, and this is something that is approachable and easily digestible and actionable, at least in getting rid of that discomfort and allowing you to be, like, go from, is it a beginner or a rookie? Which one's lower? I feel like I'm still in this.
I think a rookie
is lower.
I think so.
I feel like I've gone from rookie up one.
Yeah.
I'm less noob.
Less noob, more beginner. Easy beginner.
Yeah.
Confident beginner. Yeah, I think that as well, and I think that... Pardon?
How about you?
I think I was... Do you know what? Something that's interesting, and again, it comes up later in the chapter about influencers and her struggle with being somebody who's very visibly part of the climate crisis. I think I was expecting more memoir elements to the book.
Yeah.
Because that is like a normal, in inverted commas, what the hell is that? But like the conventions of non-fiction mean a lot that there's a lot of journalists who write books like this.
Sure.
And journalists are taught to be like, this funny thing happened to me the other day. So relatable. That's actually linked to some stats that I read about. Serious polemic right at the end of the chapter. Next time, here's another anecdote about my child. You know, that's how a lot of people write non-fiction.
Yeah.
And I think in some ways I wanted to know a little bit more about her and how she came to it, because I think that's really, really interesting.
Sure.
But then I also reminded myself that boundaries are important.
That's not what this is about.
Yeah, that's not what that's about. And I actually respect that she maybe has resisted that element of it, and she's told us a little bit about her gran and like some of her background, but not really, and no like big personal anecdotes about like friends or like things where she's had those kind of interactions. So I think that wasn't there, and actually by the end of the book I was like, I respect that.
I'm glad that wasn't
I needed the facts. I needed the facts. So I think that was there. I think that something I was saying to you earlier was that I think that, again, maybe that this is already very obvious to everybody listening, but I struggle with sincerity in some ways, in that I do need jokes every now and then, and like, but that is also my issue, not hers. Where I was like, because everything is very, very sincere, and everything is given equal weight the whole way through, but like, everything is the most urgent, the most important point.
Yeah.
There's often points where I was like, I think we're at the end of the chapter, and I'm like, oh no, we're not. There's the cadence is very like, everything is really important.
Yeah.
So again, I think if I was going to read this again,
edge quite a lot.
I'd read it slower, because I was reading it over a short period of time, because deadlines is the only thing my brain responds to. I think that, again, as a reader, you'd advise reading it out of order, maybe, or like customizing the order, and I would advise reading a chapter, putting it down.
Interesting.
Processing that for a little while, coming back to it, having a few jokes. Go and watching a funny YouTube video,
a
coming
few
back.
jokes would not have gone amiss. And this is probably an odd thing to say for a climate change book, specifically for the second half, because from what I was understanding is the first half is the more, this is why we are where we are, and the second half is, this is what we can do to do better.
Yeah.
Did you get that too?
Yes, yeah, totally.
Of the second half, I found myself, and this is not something I ever thought I'd say, asking, where is the climate change? You know,
because it was all about the justice side of it.
It's so much about the justice side, which makes a lot of sense and was refreshing because it left me yearning for something that I was scared to look into in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because of the interconnectedness, and I think that's also something that I would say to people who were nervous about entering the topic, and why I think this is such a great beginner's book for it, because it wasn't unpalatably present.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Totally.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the journey of you like, no, don't talk to me about the climate, and then by the end you're like, Mikaela, tell me more about the climate. Why are you talking about these other things? Where's my climate?
Yeah, I get it. We need justice for POC.
But give me more stats about the wind. Yeah, I think that's interesting, and I definitely, as somebody, just because of this podcast, have read a few books on climate now. I felt like the first half I knew some of it, and that is not a criticism of the book at all. That's just because of my weird life.
It's a testament to you.
Lightning.
Yeah, I saw
that.
Oh
Wow.
There's
a literal storm going on outside. This is very... I just recorded another episode of this with my friend, and we were outside and the rain came down on us, and I'm starting to feel like maybe it's the curse of the podcast. It's rain.
This is like the first sign.
And this is a heat wave, and we're having a storm. Wow. Okay. Wow. How are you in apocalypse? I think you'd be good.
I feel like I'd die on day 3.
After wielding quite a few weapons at zombies, I think that you wouldn't go down without a bit of a fight.
I feel like I'd be that idiot that would die over something that is so easily avoidable.
Like you didn't pack
not
water
being
or
able
something.
to. No, I was going more down not being able to climb a ladder. You know, like having all of the things and doing the things and the base and the things, and then just failing at something really stupid.
Last moment.
You seem quite. I don't know. I'd want to be friends with you in an apocalypse.
Oh, that's reassuring. I do actually have an emergency bag behind that door.
That's
with
fascinating.
With a foil sleeping blanket in it and some tablets for making your water safe if you need to get water from a dodgy source.
Leena's a doomsday prepper. Do you know, I say that, I've been carrying around with me in the pocket of my coat for the longest time. It's like, I think it's called a flint, what you use to make fires really easily. Because I found it when Jamie and I went to this cabin, like, I want to say 8 years ago, and I was like, one day I'll need this. And it's been with me ever since.
And maybe today is that day.
Maybe.
I'm very reassured to know that. Right.
We've got this.
Doom buddies. It's going to be fine. I think that, there was a few... I'm just looking at all my notes because I feel like there's so much to say about this book, which is more a reason why, if you're listening, you should pick it up, because I think there's actually lots to unpack. And if you're in a book club as well, I think there's actually a lot of stuff going on.
As you were talking, I was just thinking this, and one of the notes that I read was, went in thinking it would be friendly and no pressured, as intro suggests, but definitely pressuring. Things like, I pray you change, and with every fibre of my being, you will be transformed.
Yes, that's the kind of sincerity that I was a bit like, I'm not sure with the fibre of my being.
Things like language can be explained more friendly too. Understanding history instead of, we don't say this, feels very full on. I think back to that Shaaba, and I see why I was saying that as well. Then I turned to the page and the humanising chapter 1. Much better. Stick with it.
Yeah.
You know, I see why I made those points, but I also realised a lot of the reasons I was saying that is because it would have happened with any book I read.
Yes.
It was the fear of the topic.
And I think that's, again, like a readery thing where I sometimes feel like people are intimidated by reading books because they're like, oh, I don't want it to... I don't know, I don't want to be preached at. And I'm like, no, you'll change during the book, and that's fine. And it's sometimes about how you change rather than what you want the author to change, which is the problem with reviews.
You know what? Maybe you don't, and that's okay.
And maybe you just say
being open-minded enough to give it a chance and see.
Totally. And I think, one of the things that I thought was really, really interesting about the way, because we talk about living in capitalism or living under all these systems that make climate crisis possible. I just stumbled because a lot of the time I want to say climate change, and then I was learning about how we say crisis because climate change makes it sound too soft.
Right.
But I'm also adjusting.
I say climate change all the time.
Yeah, but it's anyway, it's interesting how I'm constantly having to relearn my brain. But she talks about how people say Audre Lorde said the master's tools can never dismantle the master's house. You can't use capital, or you can't use this, or you can't use that to do that. And and that's a way that like people will criticize her for attending COP, for using like social media when social media is owned by Mark Zuckerberg, or like attending these spaces that a lot of activists will say, well, that's not valid because it's not radical enough. And she's saying it's this quote that's used to say we can only create real change is like outside of the system. And she's actually saying that Lord's quote, which she quotes in full, because a lot of people just take that sentence out of context, which I probably have as well. She quotes the thing in full and explains that actually what Audre Lorde is saying is like, we can't, in the new systems, we can't replicate this. So like you can go and talk to people who like are in government or people you disagree with or like work within the systems that you have. But like when you make the new one, don't do this. Yeah. Don't carry on, which again is something that I was like really, really interesting. Wouldn't have thought of that, would have probably resisted it if somebody was like, you can't use that quote. And I'm like, I've read several Audre Lorde books and I don't think that I'm quoting that out of context at all. And I'm like, yeah, I was quoting that out of context.
Well, I think also everything comes down to balance at the end of the day. I think it's also really interesting because in some ways it kind of contradicts other elements where she's saying we cannot be in the system that we know. There was a Martin Luther King Jr. quote that she put in here about the like integration and representation in a burning house. That idea that we can kid ourselves into thinking that change within the existing system is what we need when it's not what we need.
Yeah.
But also go some way. Like and nothing is black and white.
Yeah.
I think that's what's really difficult about the topic as well. It's coming to that acceptance that people can be good and bad.
Yeah.
People don't have to just be anti-Meghan Markleists.
Yeah. Whoever these people are.
Yes. It's balance.
Because she was also, with that, she was talking about, like, people celebrating Priti Patel being in the UK government because she is an Asian lady.
Not my brown representation.
And I don't know if, I thought that was really interesting as well. And there was a really interesting bit about platforming versus solidarity that I don't know if you... What your thoughts on that were, because you've obviously got more experience of that than me. 186 is what I've put in my notes. If anybody's following along at home, 186. My concern is the pressure that can be placed on those who have been traumatised to not only find a way to navigate the harm and the trauma, which it does to both our bodies and minds, but also to be the ones to lead the conversations and find a way out. And I thought that was really interesting because she talks about, being like, oh, pass the mic to POC, make sure they get heard, which I completely agree with, but she's also just like, maybe not in every situation, maybe sometimes that's harder to be like, and I think the same pressure is put on like a few positions in power of politics to be like, we just need some people to be replaced and then we don't need to change everything.
Replaced is an interesting word.
To be switched out and for the newer model
to mysteriously
and then
disappear.
Yeah, and it's not. Yeah, I don't know how you felt. You seem like you remember that part.
Yeah.
Did you feel anything about it?
I threaded this in a lot with the conversations that were also happening about this good and bad not being the exact, which I think was not too far earlier in the book. The section on Winston Churchill.
Ah, yes.
Did you see this bit?
I didn't highlight it, but I remember it well.
So I'll ad-lib, so please don't take my word for it. There's a bit where Mikaela talks about Winston Churchill having saved a lot of people, right, by ending, or being very instrumental in the ending of World War II. But the fact that Winston Churchill also was incredibly racist and very much assisted in the famine of 3 million Indian people. And how that isn't spoken about, and how we can't just see people in these good and bad ways. Another point of the book that came out to me a lot, which I'm not sure if it sat fantastically with me. I still have to do a bit of thinking on this one. But the idea of like, we burn out. We burn out more. White people take the mic, as you were suggesting. So all of that together, I think the most valuable thing that I took from it was this idea that we are not perfect people. And it's okay to be this good and bad. And it's okay to be this vulnerable. And one of the good things about that is it actually doesn't matter about these personal experiences that we have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, as in like it doesn't matter what individuals...
About this... Sorry, you read it fully and it was beautifully written. The harm and the trauma that we have in our bodies and minds this need to be the ones to lead the conversations and find a way out, the responsibility doesn't rest with any of us and shouldn't, because it's us as a collective and our ability to learn.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I think as well, like this part, I wasn't, I don't know, but I thought it was an interesting point that she's like, while if you experience privilege, it can obstruct us from being able to see a way out. Having people with lived experience is of vital importance. But she also says the overemphasis on lived experience as a qualifier might not be great. There has been a tendency in social justice spaces to say that we must pivot to and focus on getting those who have experienced deep trauma at the hands of the oppressive systems to become the leaders in tackling these issues. And again, it's that thing of like...
We can't take that on face value.
And I think with Priti Patel, somebody that's probably experienced a lot of racism, but it's not necessarily a qualifier for her being the best person to act on behalf of people that happen to...
Absolutely. And I mean,
have been
wish
racialised the same
was
way.
The only example that we have, but unfortunately it's not. Like, even Suella Braverman and everything that's happening right now with it's the unspeakable Rwanda reforms it's horrific. To think that playing these brown cards, which is what it is, right? And what a lot of people see this as, is enough. Because it's not. And I think it really highlights as well just how important intersectionality is. You know, we forget that not all brown people are the same, not all middle class people are the same. Yeah. There's a lot going on. And therefore, why are we platforming these people?
Yeah. And I think that's not the only qualifier for somebody to be like... And I think it's like this thing of like, we think about who we should be listening to or like who's going to lead us out of this. And I think we're in that mindset of like, we need leaders.
There is no Superman.
Where are the
Stop
leaders?
waiting. Be that person.
And again, but both people who, as our jobs, like part of our jobs is talking to people and getting them to listen. And that's often a bit of a dichotomy when you try and believe in like collective movements to be like, listen to me, but then don't listen to me all the time and listen to me critically. And I was being interviewed on stage recently and somebody was like, oh, you've got so many followers. And I'm like, you make me sound like Jesus. Like, they're not actually literally following me about. In
Leena,
fact,
cult edition.
Yeah, they're people that are watching what I do and like taking the bits that they like and maybe replicating them. Yeah. That's fine. But I don't want them to follow me.
That's really interesting though that you say that, because I know this isn't a podcast about how to be an influencer, influencing 101.
I'm willing to pivot.
Well, no, my question is, why did you get into creating? I'm sure it wasn't for the audience.
No, I didn't. I mean, I was like, I was there at the beginning. But I did start making them, in 2009, which was, now you've taught me, 3 years before monetization. Again, I like processing things out loud, and I think the only way I really work stuff out is by writing something about it or creating something around something that I'm confused about. And I think it's a shame not to share that with people. So I think a lot of my early videos were me like working out how to do an English degree, working out like how to navigate the political system when I was like newly like a baby voter and stuff. So I think it's more about like being excited to share and being more excited to hear the responses back, even if those responses are people being like, no, I don't really agree.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, but I still like talking to you, so let's keep talking about that. You know, so I think maybe that, but then maybe I'm also, there probably is a little bit of ego in there. Like, come on.
Get me
I'm
wrong.
also a drama kid.
Yeah, well, like, we exist for validation, right? There's a reason that likes feel fantastic. And when people say, oh my gosh, I really like your videos, it tickles something funny inside. You know, there's no hiding from that, but it's not the main reason that you do it. It's not the main reason I do it either. And I think about like the Am I the Arsehole posts, which is something so stupid that I do on my channel. I'm sure people think it's really stupid, but without sounding too deep, and I've not really spoken about this on my channel, the reason I do it is because I really struggle with these personal conundrums. I've dealt with living with a full-on narcissist for a very long time, and I'm learning to relearn, unlearn and relearn a lot of the boundaries of what normal life is.
Is it your cat? Yeah. Because cats are
my damn cat.
See, why do I have to make a joke? Sorry.
I love it. Put that in the book.
I can't be too sincere. It's not the point. Yeah, no, living with a narcissist.
No, it's very interesting, isn't it? Like how we can take these things. I learn so much from storytelling of other people. And I in no way went online to position myself as an authority. I'm pretty sure, like, if you look back at my previous videos, although I say it less now, it's very much like, I don't know if this is right. I want to have these conversations. I want to know where your lines lie, like, collectively. Not because I'm interested in you, individual person watching this video. You are, I love you, irrelevant to me. But I want to know how society reacts to these things, right? And it's odd because then you find yourself accidentally becoming this position of authority where people are like, no, but I want to hear what you think. I value what you think. And I kind of want to go, but why? And I feel like that's so different to politicians who, in these positions of power, who literally have the ability to do something much greater than any of us individually could do. They don't do that because they haven't come into this profession wanting to unlearn and learn and wanting to receive criticism. Yes. It is for the power. You can't phrase it any other way. Call a broom, is that what you said?
A spade.
Why do I say broom?
Because you're naturally...
Because I'm weird.
You're just the feminine urge to clean, I guess, and my urge to dig bodies. That's what that is. Wow. We'll take that up with our therapist later.
The doomsday prepper of the Stepford wife.
Yeah, literally. You're like, I was like, I'll dig the graves of the zombies. You're like, and I'll brush up afterwards and I'll make sure nobody knows. Perfect pairing.
But yeah, it's not that, isn't it? And it's part of the reason why we can't value these people too hard just because they happen to hold a brown card. Doesn't mean they're right.
Definitely. I think as well, like with that whole, do you exist on the internet because you want people to look at you and you want the praise? I'm like, that is something that only internally somebody can answer, in the same way that it's less socially acceptable to go up to a doctor and be like, are you only a doctor because you feel like you're saving people's lives? Does it make you feel important? Do you send you cards? Do you get flowers at the end of the year? Like what, and you get to go to parties and say you're a doctor. I bet you love that, don't you? Like, do you know what I mean? Like nobody knows what anybody's internal motivation is, and I think that there's not I can't really think of many careers that are completely without some kind of ego in them, and there's some kind of, you could use a savior complex for anything.
Since when was having an ego a bad thing though, inherently? Like, it's not, I mean, maybe if you're one of the killers of the 7 deadly sins, then you'd have a problem with it. I mean, there's a moderation that's required, but it's not a bad thing to want validation. My psychology background's coming out. It's actually one of the main reasons that we speak to people. One of the 4 reasons for affiliation is
I think that the validation thing's valid as well when we look to other people to talk about the climate, because we want validate. You want to be like, I think the climate crisis is happening, and you need somebody to be like, yes it is. Yes. But you don't need them to follow it up with, and what are you doing about it? Which is the fear. So you're like, you don't want to talk to people about it. You don't want to, because then you'll get your ego hurt when people are like, well, you're fucking it up, aren't you? So why are you even talking about it? And that's the thing.
Speaking of internal motivations, though, one thing I learned so much from this book was about the internal motivations of the fossil fuel industry. We've always heard about it, right? We know fossil fuel's bad. Everybody knows that BP and Shell are not the most wonderful people in the world. They're not people, they're entities. But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But this gave me the words. This gave me the tools to understand that a lot more as to the why. And there is no underselling or sugarcoating the motivations of why they do what they do.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. Yeah. But it also gives you that thing of like, I'm not as confused, therefore I am more likely to act because I do know that this is wrong. Whereas before I was like, but maybe they are fixing it. We don't know. Yeah. And then the more I read about stuff like this, I'm like... But I think what's good about this book as well is it's a great beginner book because she references so many other people in it, and she's explicitly like, I think you should go listen to this podcast and read this book, and after this, maybe watch this documentary and do this. And it's great in that way that I feel like...
But not in an overwhelming sense either.
No. Yeah. It's definitely like footnotes and asides and like, if this interests you, do this. But it is a nice little web of other things to go into. And in that way, I think she's achieving her goal of like not platforming herself as the hero, which is like part of the point. But yeah, something that she says really interesting about pedestaling and online activism. I think that to some extent, pedestaling is a comforting thing for those who do it. Existing for superhuman people of miraculous leaders bringing about change lets the majority of us off the hook, right? And I don't know if you've ever felt like that, but that thing of like, when people hold you up as perfect on the internet and then they tear you down, it's like, but I
and then root for you to come back.
Yeah, and it's like, who benefits, who does this, and why? And it's not often you pedestaling yourself, it's that people are doing it for you. So I think, I also really valued this bit at the end. She says, Visibility is often misleading. Making all the work to create visible change isn't always possible. A number of followers or likes or shares does not equate impact. And this kind of value of like inch wide, mile deep relationships over inch deep, mile wide relationships, which is a hard thing to get around. But she's basically saying the internet is full of mile wide but inch deep connection, and actually there's a lot of people behind the scenes that you don't see.
This is a quality over quantity, isn't it?
Yeah, that's
what we're talking about.
Totally.
And there's another really great quote around here where she talks
there's
about.
So many.
I think it's super.
My highlighter has almost run out.
No, but you know what? There were a lot of mic drop moments in here that I was like, wow, yes, this is really like stuck with me, and it's made me have so many of these conversations. I mean, I just finished reading this book. 3 days ago, and I spoke to 5 people about this book,
really,
not including you.
That's a really good track record.
It really works. And I am not a social butterfly.
You're like, and I bet that's all the 5 people I've talked to.
Yeah. Around that, she says this platforming, it actually helps no one. It doesn't help the person you're platforming. It doesn't help you. And it doesn't help anyone as a society, and it certainly doesn't help the cause that you're trying to fight for. Yeah. So why are we doing this?
Yeah.
But parasocial relationships also exist. So it's very difficult to, again, like, it's all about that balance. One wonderful thing about this whole, mile wide, inch deep nature is that we don't get an excuse to put the burden on Greta Thunberg.
Yes.
It's
poor
actually,
Greta.
It's, you know what? I'm doing a good thing. Me choosing to recycle and compost and go veggie for this one meal makes a difference. And it's really important to have that as a gateway, because I think it's also so easy to be like, you know what? Doesn't matter. I'm not influential in this space. Whatever I do means nothing, because at the end of the day, the government's not going to do anything, which has always been my mindset. And the easiest thing to fall back on when climate change has made me feel really uncomfortable.
Yeah, and then it's hard because it's like the government's always changing, not always for the better, but they're not a fixed thing. And I think it definitely helped me to think about that. And also just like I feel like with maybe again I am projecting, but Mikaela is a lot younger than I don't actually know how old you are. I've never asked you, but
I'm 28.
I'm 33, and I feel like because she's like she must be about 10 years younger than me. So she must have grown up with like more of an awareness of this than I did. And I feel like maybe I've been desensitized a little bit because I didn't grow up hearing about it. So it's nice to actually have somebody to challenge my aversion to sincerity.
But she does also talk about it a lot, doesn't she? About how she feels really privileged to have grown up in those environments where people have been talking about it from university and beyond. And you're right, that's definitely not something I've had. And it does make it harder to enter the conversation and easier to excuse yourself from it.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, but I think we all grow up with different, she's got that. I think everybody's grown up with something they understand more than something else, and like being able to link that is really valuable.
Absolutely.
Would you recommend this book to somebody? And who would that somebody be? Would it be everybody, or would it be like just a few people and this is their specific circumstances?
That is such an interesting question. Really interesting question. When I initially read how heavy this was on race, I felt really reassured that this was a conversation that I deserved to be a part in. Then as I was thinking of the book and thinking of you reading the book, Leena, I thought, hang on a second, is this a conversation that white people can be involved in? Because if we're saying no, that's really tricky, you know? And it's not to say that white people can't be involved, of course, but, is it something that climate change is tricky? Speaking about POC rights can be tricky for people who are not POC and not involved in it. And again, a fantastic excuse to be like, nope, I'm not part of this conversation anymore. But what was really interesting is, again, this idea of climate justice affecting everything. It wasn't just race that was talked about. There were quotes in here about trans people in particular and affecting the binary, and I was just like, oh, this is really interesting. Quite a few references of LGBT plus culture and political nature, and also disability was discussed in here as well too. And I just thought, wow, this really is for everyone. So I'm struggling to think of an exact audience because of that aspect of it. I think what I'm trying to say is I think it's very easy to feel scared because of how racial the book feels and is situated in the context of Mikaela's lens, but it's not a reason to not read it. And when you read it, you realise that So for that reason, I don't think there's anyone I wouldn't recommend it to in that sense. I would recommend it specifically to the people who, like me, were really nervous at the beginning.
Yeah, the afraid.
Yeah, especially with the title, like, It's Not That Radical.
Yeah, it'd just be like, by the way,
which is so
it
not
will
the case.
feel. It should be like, it's not that radical, but it will feel that way for the first 50 pages. That's my new subtitle.
It's not that radical by chapter 10.
Yeah, you won't think it's radical by the end. But yeah, no, I think it's interesting as well. Like I never thought about you thinking about me reading it. Why? Do you know what I mean? I wasn't like, oh God, I hope Shaaba's not worried about me reading this book. You know, but no, I think
it wasn't a worry at all. I just wondered if it was because a lot of the books that you read that I am still too scared to read now. I will read them, but they don't talk about it from this very different lens. It's very face on to the climate crisis only, not the other social, economic justice factors that also feed into it. So yeah, I thought that might have been confronting.
It definitely was, and I think that I have complicated feelings around it as well, because it's that thing of wanting to engage with it but not wanting to take any space away from others, and like wanting, again, not being able to be perfect about it. Like, I don't know the history of I'm learning, I'm reading. I think a lot of people of every race in the UK doesn't know loads about the history of it. I think we've all been shadowed from it.
I mean, I think it still astonishes me as well how so many people of colour will also not see race as a social construct. They'll get so angry at that being brought up as a topic,
and I definitely can't say that. Do you know what I mean? I'm like, I'm not the person to say
person of colour.
You're actually racialised. You know, that's not me. I'll be sitting over here for that conversation. But I think, yeah, you're right. I think it's meeting everybody where they're at, and also like, just because if you talk about a subject, you like, what I fear when I talk about racial justice in the climate is that if I open my mouth and mention it, people will be like, oh, so you're an authority about it? What happened in 1817? You know, I think that expectation to be an authority about something just because you want to engage in a conversation about it is something that's often not about you, it's about the person who's pushing that on you. So absolutely. I think it's like keeping it keeping that humility, but being like, hey, I've read some stuff about this.
Want to have a chat?
Yeah.
Is it confusing to you too?
Let's unpack this.
Yeah. Does it also sometimes make you need to do a nervous poo? Should we have
should we be constipated in adjoining cubicles? So I think but it's also like the best conversations are the ones that make you a little bit sweaty and like, because you can't have real connection if you can't be uncomfortable with people. So I think that's
one of the quotes that I've stolen from somewhere, but it just sits in my brain. I have to remind myself all the time is that you don't have to be a guru. You just need to be a guide.
I like that.
It really helps me battle my imposter syndrome, like a lot in many different areas. You don't need to be the best. If you have something to share, it's worthy of sharing it. I feel like that definitely applies with this book to now how I feel about climate change. It's okay to have those conversations, and you don't need to know everything.
And they don't need to go well.
Yeah. And maybe you do have a nervous poo, and that's okay too.
Mate, the revolution is paperwork and nervous poos. That's what we've learnt today.
Who gives a crap? Sponsor Leena's podcast.
Yeah, sorted. You heard it here first. Shaaba, how can people find you on the internet if they would like to follow your amazing work?
I don't think they need to find you.
You're like, I don't want to be platformed. Don't look at me.
Should you wish to, you can just find me on Shaaba or Sherbet Lemon across the internet. But I would really, honestly, rather you buy this book. Truly.
That's my wish. Buy the book. Thank you so much for listening. Happy reading. Or not. It's up to you. But I'm proud of you for listening.
What do you do to a podcast? Do you thumbs up it? Leave a review?
Do you tickle it? Give it a little tickle. Leave a review.
Leave a review, absolutely. And listen to other of Leena's episodes, because Leena's amazing and you need to eat a frog too.
Eat that frog.
Eat Leena's frog. That's what I'm asking you to do.
Merch. Done.